comparing evidences that are often given for God to like the quantum idealist model. And we're live now, so go ahead.
Doesn't matter. So, like, the first question is, why did you stop doing apologetics? Are you still a Christian? That kind of stuff.
I am still a Christian, but it's kind of like a non-institutional Christian. But I stopped doing it because, like, I noticed that the way they were doing this was they were trying to aim at a conclusion rather than trying to, like, study reality. Like, when I first entered it, I was trying to do physics. I wanted to find the grand unified theory, right? And I discovered something that's, well, really cool, that, you know, space emerges from information. Matter's not fundamental. Space isn't even fundamental. It's all information at bottom. I'm like, well, this would totally bolster the apologetics case. I thought, you know, this whole dualism thing is not, it's not like they're wedging themselves into a corner, basically, right? Like, all you got to do is say, here's a scientific explanation, counter explanation, therefore we don't need your kind of God of the gaps magic explanation, right? And so I see this, I'm like, well, I have an explanation that is not God of the gaps, it's science, and it will totally undercut the materialist case and, you know, prop up theism. And I inject this, and I got some level of popularity with it, but I discovered at the, like, professional level. I mean, there are some apologists who kind of liked it, like Merlin liked it, Josh Rasmussen liked it, but there was a lot of the institutional apologetics community that did not seem to like it. In fact, they seemed like, I mean, you think they'd like it because it gives them everything on a silver platter in a sense, right? But there was this kind of weird pushback I got from it constantly.
I don't know. I think that makes sense because I think, like, the point of apologetics is in order to make arguments that are easy and intuitive for people to understand. Like, the more complicated the argument, the more it only caters to, like, the academic community. And so most of the apologetics would be focused on, like, the Frank Turek's, the cosmological, teleological, those kind of things, because they're just so easy for people to understand.
They are easy. The trouble with it is there's these Achilles heels with them. Like, I mean, the cosmological arguments you probably would think are the strongest class of the traditional apologetic arguments, right?
Probably not. I would say, in terms of physics, the fine-tuning arguments are probably better than the cosmological arguments.
Okay,
even that, I'd say that the moral argument is probably the strongest argument, just because it pulls on people's intuitions significantly stronger than the teleological argument.
Because what I was getting at was, like, you saw the Carroll versus Craig debate where you go about the Kalam, right? And Carroll comes out of the right out of the opening gate, and he says, well, I could be attacking the premise that the universe had a beginning, but instead I'm going to attack the premise that, you know, God, it had to be a transcendent cause causing this. And he says, well, you know, let's say we posit a first cause. That's not how you explain a first cause, basically, right? Like, you try and explain the first cause of the universe. You want something that's going to derive the mathematical conditions that describe the beginning moment of the Big Bang, right? Like, that's the whole point of, you know, when you do physics, you're trying to say we have this beginning initial state of the universe, and how do we, if we want to go back further, how do we explain how we get there? And we had to have some math where we derive the initial conditions of the universe.
Yeah, I think so. But I think, like, from the apologetics perspective, like, God doesn't provide any math whatsoever. And so their goal really isn't to provide a mathematical equation. So they're answering a different question than the physics question.
I know that, but that's the problem. That's what Carroll's point was. He's like,
yeah, and so that's why I agree with what Carroll said. Was like, he can just, if he's going to play the same game apologists are, he can make up something better that also fulfills the physics role of providing an equation, and that would be a better conclusion to draw than the apologetics one. And that's like the Achilles heel you were talking about.
Well, that's the thing. You see, I agree with him as well for the exact same reason, because I was coming at this from an angle of, I want to do physics. I want to figure out the grand unified theory. And in the way of finding the grand unified theory, I stumble across this really cool conclusion that, oh, we can explain everything with information. It totally undoes materialism. It resonates with idealism. This will undermine the entire atheist paradigm. But then they're given this, right? And they're given this way in a way that's, I mean, yes, it can be complicated, but you can dumb the complicated stuff down. You can make a popularized version of some of this. I mean, you see this, like Brian Greene and so on discussing the holographic principle, or people discussing emergent space, something like a popular science show. It can be made dumb, right? Or dumb enough the average person can understand it.
I mean, that they could understand it, sure, but I think not not enough to make it to the point where it is intuitively can be grasped by people and it feels right to them. And I think that's the key, is that they need to be able to like intuitively like, yeah, this feels right to me. And that level of dumbing it down, I don't think is capable, because there's so many counterintuitive.
That may be the case. And maybe that's because I got too big of a brain. Like, I think it's dumb enough. No, it's not dumb enough. You're still like going way above me. But yeah, the real issue is from my intuitions is this, from a science background, I'm like, you have to have something that derives this mathematically. Saying God did it. Well, how did God do it? And then they're like, well, by God power. I'm like, well, how does that work? I don't know. Well, we'll sprinkle some fairy dust on that. Will solve the problem, right? And the whole thing, like, that is not what a first cause should look like. And I knew this like way. If you don't notice my channel, I never use any of the traditional arguments for God on my channel in my entire time, right? And the reason was I knew they had these problems. Like, even before I saw that debate with Carol, I'm like, yeah, that's not an acceptable. I mean, I think God caused the universe, but that's not an acceptable explanation for how God caused the universe, right? Like, you can't just say, well, God did it by God power. And that's like, no, that's like saying fairy dust did it.
Right. That's the spaghetti monster argument. If you just want to say God did it by magic, we're just going to say the spaghetti monster did it.
Yeah. And then I had a model. Let's actually make this mathematically solid, right? Because then, and you don't have to remember, I said the precondition for this whole thing is I'm not going to force you to accept any conclusions here. But I had a model where, you could take Carroll's own emergent space-time model, emergent space-time entanglement, then simply equate entanglement with consciousness, and there are ways to do this. They had the, Tononi's integrated information model, and then quantum cognition, and then more recently they actually had some experiment in Dublin University where they were able to map. They found entangled proton spin in your brain water that is exactly matched to your EEG reading that measures your consciousness. And the conclusion they made was that the only way those two things could be correlated without destroying the entanglement was if the consciousness was already in the entanglement somehow. And that was like 2 years or 3 years ago. I think they had that come out now. So like there's a way to make that argument, and you just combine them. And now I have a first cause of the universe that is a mind, and it has a mind that has properties that you could consider divine properties. It's universal wave function is outside of time, according to the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. So that's eternal. It's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, etc. And it's the first cause of the universe, right? But it also, you have put math on it. And it's math that even matches to Carroll's own model, right? You have essentially emergent space-time from integrated information, and you have a model that is completely, it's God did it in a certain sense, but it's God did it in a way that doesn't rely on any magic, and it's all, actually, it kind of has like a scientific model of God in there, doesn't it?
Well, it's definitely a better approach than what apologists do. I would still say I don't think there's any evidence to think that just because, like, I agree that there's quantum entanglement and things in the brain. Obviously, it's been literally everything, but that doesn't mean that it's fundamental to consciousness. Like,
okay. So what they were saying, and there's kind of a diversion, kind of breaks the rule here, because the goal is not to debate God's existence here, but the issue is not that there was not entanglement in the brain. It was that the entanglement was correlated to the EEG readings that are correlated to your consciousness. Like, so it was like literally a 1-to-1. Here's the entanglement spike on the MRI, and here's the EEG reading on the electroencephalograph.
So I would still think like you can find quantum entanglement in a pineapple, but does that mean that some quality of pineapple-ness is?
Oh, no. What I'm saying is it's not that there's like random entanglement, because there's entanglement all over the place, right, in nature. The issue was that the entanglement was spiked. They had an MRI scan that was watching the entanglement spike in the brain, right? So it wasn't just like you could see there's a pattern that the entanglement's going. And then whenever the entanglement spiked, you would see the EEG spiking as well. There was a correlated pattern. It was like there's entanglement in the brain, and that entanglement is somehow correlated with your EEG, which is measuring your consciousness.
Sure. Now, so the question is, how do you go from that to which is the chicken and which is the egg? Which is the one that is?
They actually did that in the paper. What they said, and they actually said this is a technique from quantum gravity, where they said if you have one entangled system that is correlated to another entangled system, they have to be connected by a third entangled system. And the reasoning for that was let's say you take an entangled system, right? and that entangled system is causing some other activity, but it's not, it's correlated to some other activity, right? Well, for it to be correlated to it, it's going to have to interact with it somehow, right? Okay, what happens when you interact with a quantum system?
It becomes measured.
It becomes measured, which destroys the coherence, right? You destroy the coherence. Well, entanglement is just when you have coherence of two or more objects. So you destroy the entanglement. And so the point they were making in the paper is essentially, if this was externally correlated to consciousness somehow, it would destroy the entanglement, and we wouldn't be measuring any entanglement in the MRI scan. And so therefore the argument was the only other way it could interact with the consciousness is if it's entangled with it. So that was their argument, though not to try and press that on you today, because I'm trying to go somewhere else today with this thing. So
sure.
So as you yourself said, this is a better argument, right? Like you can put math on it, and even like let's say that we switch this out to Sean. Say that Craig had responded, oh, but we do have an explanation in the physics. He said, like, Carol's like, if you open up a quantum field theory textbook or a cosmology textbook, you don't find the words transcendent cause anywhere. Remember that? Okay, well, what if Craig had responded back and said, well, we do have this, but it transcends space-time, and it's Carol's own physics. Entanglement transcending space-time, and entanglement causes space-time to emerge. And then he ties entanglement to consciousness. And then the whole rest of the debate is essentially about entanglement equaling consciousness or not. But at that point, you at least have a bridge that undercuts Carol's main objection, right? Right?
From a scientific perspective, it would be a better reply, yes, but it would fail to be as compelling to people as Craig's argument, because again, it's not as intuitive. So like Craig or someone like me or Matt Dillahunty would respond to that by pointing out the counterintuitive consequences of information theory and why it seems weird and why most people can't understand it. And then that would make you would lose the audience to the atheist in that argument, even though it made more sense.
I guess the thing is like Carol did win the debate, right? I think we agree with that. So the thing with that was in that debate, like you can have, Lawrence Krauss, and he's kind of philosophically obtuse atheist. He even believes in a first cause. Hawking believes in a first cause, right? So there's a first cause is not the issue. There are dyed-in-the-wool, new atheist popularizers who believe in a first cause. The issue is like this can't qualify as a first cause because magic did it is not an appropriate explanation. Like not in science, not in philosophy, not anywhere. Like this is when you have an argument, you have the premises of the argument. They have terms in them. You got a conclusion that has terms in it. The terms in the conclusion have to match the terms in the premises, right? And they just don't match the terms in the premises.
Yeah, like they just add in magic and consciousness power and stuff that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's irritating. It's like, and this is like a systemic problem, and they've actually wedged themselves in. Like if you notice, if you put a dualist versus materialist dialectic, like you have dualists arguing materialists will like eventually. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen by, gradation. It will erode, and eventually you'll have, it's the God of the gaps. God of the gaps is always pushed back farther every time the gap gets closed, right?
I disagree because I'm a materialist. I don't think dualism is correct.
No. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is if dualism is God of the gaps.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And because of that, whenever materialism closes a gap, dualism is pushed into retreat.
Sure.
And so what I'm getting at is whenever you have that dialectic, materialism versus dualism, and whatever argument of God you're using, it will always push it back. And you will also run into the problem of, well, you provide this piece of evidence for God. It may not even be, first cause. It could be fine tuning or design or moral argument or whatnot. But all those arguments are simply, those are essentially arguments from ignorance. In a sense, you could essentially say all the apologetic arguments are, in a sense, arguments from ignorance. In that sense,
yeah, that's kind of the point. Is like all of those fallacies, the arguments from ignorance, God of the gaps, appeals to authority. Those are the reason those exist is that they are intuitively compelling to people, but they are provably false or provably illogical. And so we've named the provably illogical but extremely compelling arguments, given these names, which are the fallacies. But apologists are extremely smart to use those because they are extremely compelling, in order to get people to follow their ideology. And so
Right,
that's
but
literally the whole point.
after you poke past that, and you do a good job of that, and other people do a good job of that. Once you poke past that layer of intuition at first and point out, let's look at the nitty gritty, like Sean Carroll did in debate, then it collapses and it always goes into retreat as a result.
Partially yes and partially no. So it goes into retreat for people who take the logical fallacies seriously, who've studied into the data, who are actually like really want to have those consistent beliefs. But most Christians don't do that. Most Christians barely even read the Bible.
Right, but I don't mean the average Christian. I mean average Joe on the street.
Sure, yeah, like an average person who's like really studying logical fallacies or is totally neutral, is just listening from a logical perspective with no biases. Yeah, they're going to lean more towards the Carroll approach, which is why like most of the European countries are leaning away from God very quickly.
Well, like here's another thing though. Remember you said to the Christian it won't matter. Well, here's the problem. Apologetics, the entire point of apologetics. You know what the gold standard of apologetics is?
Keep people believing.
Well, no. What measures that gold standard?
What measures it? I don't know.
The ultimate gold standard is not William Lane Craig. It's not Moreland. It's not Ed Fesser. It's not Inspiring Philosophy. It's not even me. The ultimate gold standard. What?
Paul?
No, the ultimate, definitely not Paul. The ultimate gold standard is people like you. Because if you're not convinced at the end of the day, we haven't done our job, have we?
No. Absolutely not. Totally disagree. So I think the point of apologetics isn't to convince atheists. The point of apologetics is to make Christians feel secure in their faith because there is some intellectual groundwork, or it seems like there's intellectual groundwork. The point of apologetics isn't to convert.
That is actually that's the real goal, right? But the problem is that kind of exposes the whole facade, doesn't it? Like the official stated goal is to explain these things and do so in a way that convinces the average Joe, the external person who's not in the group, this is what explains it, right?
Or at least to provide an answer to those people when they question
yeah. So the point is like okay, it's keeping people in the flock, which is okay, that's good, but it's like, are you trying to figure reality? Are you trying to look for truth, or are you trying to find a convincing argument to kind of sophistically keep someone inside the flock?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of a facade. And then you here's another one. Let's look at the moral argument for a second, right? I don't really like this one. I mean, like, there's a level of intuition to it, but at the same time, you look at it up close and you realize it's massively question begging on more than one level. But let's just say that it works, okay? So we have moral absolutes. We have these ideas of morality and objective morality, and then we have to ground them somehow. We ground them on God. Let's say that God is the explanation. How did God's moral concepts enter your consciousness?
Magic, God, soul, power, Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. With fairy dust sprinkled on top, right?
Yep.
But now let's go to idealism, right? And we have a completely physics-based model of idealism. Well, then you got your mind inside of God's mind, right? And if you go further, remember that Inspiring Philosophy is emergent space-time argument, the emergent space-time from a shared inner space, right? So you have like outer space emerges from this inner space, but it's a collective inner space. We just don't have access to the full thing. Well, that explains it instantaneously, because then God's mind essentially overlaps your mind. It's all in a sense part of the same overarching mental system. You don't have complete access to the above thing, but you can definitely. The reason God's ideas of good are getting into your mind are because there's this overlapping conscious system. Your mind is connected to God's mind, in other words.
Well, there's multiple ways to make a logical explanation of how God could transfer the beliefs or the moral principles to your mind. The problem is that anytime you give a specific, some people are going to intuitively agree and some people are going to intuitively disagree. And so the ambiguity of not saying specifically how he did it and just leaving it blank for people to just use their intuition and say, oh, he's all powerful or whatever, he could do it in lots of ways, keeps more believers. So while I agree you can provide a more literal interpretation. I would say there's better options than even that. Just say like conveys it through a law of physics or something, just the moral law of physics, like mine. Like that would work.
Well,
Like
in
just,
my case, it's both. But of
yeah.
course, then you got to question what is that? How do you get laws of physics explaining consciousness? And then that goes into the whole quantum idealist direction. So,
Oh, there's lots of ways to do that too. You can prove
but
physically by saying it interacts with the brain in some way and causes us to pull in some direction. Like there's an actual
yeah,
moral particle. There's lots of ways to do it. But the point is that anytime you give a specific, like you just did now, my intuition would agree more with the way I described it, and your intuition would agree with the way you described it. And everybody has different intuitions based on their own
but
beliefs.
if you keep it without an explanation, then you keep it ambiguous enough not to.
That more people will accept it. That's politics. It's literally just a politician. Why do they give generic answers instead of specific answers? Because specific answers, some people will intuitively agree with, some people won't. But the general idea, more people will agree with than not.
All right. So, but that kind of again goes back to the whole issue of apologetics is not about truth seeking. Like when I started this, I was not going into apologetics originally. I wanted to go into physics. I wanted to study quantum gravity at a graduate level. I want to solve the grand unified. I wanted Hawking's dream of knowing the mind of God, so to speak, right? Whereas these guys, they want to do sophistry essentially in circles, right?
Sure.
And it was really weird because whenever I would, and I got pushback on a lower level, and I got some people. Moreland loved the arguments. Okay, he just loved watching my videos. He thought this was really good ideas, but there were other people, you talk to about this stuff, and you would try and point these things out, like you have a way of explaining this stuff, and they would then try and shoot it like you have a perfectly good way of explaining this, and it fits everything everything we know about physics. And there is a little issue of the whole quantum cognition thing, which is obviously controversial, but at the same time, you can actually conceive of how that could happen with science, And so they didn't want it, and it's almost like.
Can you give a couple of examples of some of the pushback they gave?
Well, there was one case where I was getting this Steve Williams. He got in this big giant argument, and I was trying to explain I have a better model of miracles, right? I have a video on my channel where I use the physics of this system to create an actual model for how miracles could work. And I said, well, I challenge you to do the same thing. And he's like, he got real pissed off because he didn't like the idea of explaining miracles in the first place. Or, and then another guy was pointing out, this is just like.
So let's start with that one. That's a perfect example. So like, it kind of goes back to that statement of placing limits on the mind of God, where you're saying, this is how God did it. And then it leads to like, well, does my intuition agree with that, or does their intuition agree with that? And his intuition clearly didn't. He didn't like the way that sounded. It didn't mesh with his idea of how God would have done things. It just sounds weird. And
in other words, I explained the force with midi-chlorians, and the fans hated it, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. And so it seems like your goal essentially is to make a more refined version of apologetics that ties more into the scientific model, which is, there's lots of different versions of that. That's like what old earth creationism is, essentially the same thing, just to a lesser degree. And when old earth creationism was created, the young earth creationists hated it. They were like, nope, this is stupid. The way God did it, he did it 6,000 years, literal interpretation. The dinosaurs and the man were walking together, and no one died.
And the dinosaurs walking up the ramp to Noah's Ark, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you try to apply specific models to Bible or religious interpretations, you're going to get a lot of pushback because people's intuition aren't going to agree with you. And so the ultimate measure of truth to apologetics, as you mentioned, isn't to seek truth. It's what intuitively feels right to them in their worldview.
This actually reminds me, way back when I first paired up with Inspiring Philosophy to give them the introspective argument and the digital physics argument and all this. Very first, like the first couple of weeks, remember that time when he was coming? I don't know if you remember, this might have been before your time. Remember when he first came out with the digital physics argument video, like over 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
The introspective argument and all this. There was pushback immediately in the comment section, and there was some guy who came in there and he said something to the effect of, like he lists a whole bunch of problems. So this is like heresy. This is there's problems with this. And then he brings up this other issue of one of the other problems, though, this is the ultimate naturalism. You're essentially making God natural. It's going the long way around of making God natural. Like, yeah, that's the point. That's what the whole point is. Like, you can convince someone who's a Christian. You might be able to convince some random Joe on the street, but the average random Joe on the street is currently going to go more your direction if you put, an apologist versus you up on a debate, right? And it's certainly not going to convince you, right? I would imagine that if you were to ever find yourself being convinced of God's existence, it would have to be a naturalized version of God, right?
No, because my epistemology allows for more mystery stuff. So like I just need novel testable predictions. So if you say God is magic and supernatural or whatever, and he can do repeatable testable predictions, like I pray for a gold brick and it appears or whatever, I'd be happy to grant things that I couldn't explain or understand, like the supernatural.
There's a sense in which that becomes scientific, though. It's not exactly natural, but it is.
Well, the experiment or the result would be natural in a way that I could interact with.
The way in which it happened is.
Well, the source doesn't have to be natural. So God could be supernatural, and he could have magic.
Well, maybe not you. Maybe let's say Sean Carroll. Let's say Sean Carroll found himself believing in God at some point. How do you think that would be possible? Like the only way you think that would be possible?
Oh, there would have to be some version of God that provides mathematical equations that give either testable predictions or a more mathematically elegant explanation of the universe than his current model, in order for him to really believe. So, like,
but you'd have to have math attached to God somehow.
Yeah, it would have to be his expertise, and it'd have to do it better than he can, or more elegant than he can. So like if we found a Bible, another like buried Bible that had all of the mathematical equations of string theory and stuff, and it just worked better. And he's like,
a better Bible.
Okay, yeah.
A better had a video called "A Better Bible." It was a thing a whole lecture he gave. We're going to get into the topic of a better Bible later on because I have something a little bit surprising I've been sitting on for about 10 years. I kept it under the rug because it would scare the living daylights out of the apologists if I brought it out. And it would freak some of the atheists out too. But okay, so remember you said beforehand about how... Okay, firstly, we could kind of agree, I think, that the kind of model I give is better in terms of explaining the data that apologists use to try and claim God's existence, right? Like the first cause or fine-tuning or so on, right?
Yeah, there are more entailments and less hidden variables.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to crank this down a little bit further. And I'm going to actually... Okay, let's talk about basic physics. Just jump to basic physics for a second. So you're familiar with entanglement, obviously, right? You have two particles in joint superposition, separate at a distance, and they interact. They don't actually interact, but they are correlated instantaneously, such that when one snaps out of the superposition, the other one snaps out simultaneously, right? And this would normally violate relativity, or would seem to at first glance, right? Until you realize that it's actually outside. The only way it could do that really is if the correlation is outside space-time. And there's a lot of physicists who say that same thing. Like George Musser was on Big Thing saying the reason it's happening is because the intervening space is a kind of construction, and the entanglement is outside of that, right? Now, let's take one of those particles and let's put it into a cyclotron, speed it up to about 99.9% of the speed of light, right? Okay, so you got two. One of them is perfectly stationary. The other one is sped up to 99% of the speed of light, right? Okay, now you play with one of the particles. The other one snaps out of coherence instantly, right? Okay, when you have something going at 99% of the speed of light, what happens to the space of the one particle with respect to the frame of the other one?
It shouldn't make a difference because it's relative. The motion.
No, it rotates into the time frame. Remember, it's a Lorentz transformation. It's Einstein's relativity.
Sure.
The space rotates into the time, right? So the space of particle one becomes the time of particle two, and vice versa, right? Space-time translation, or Lorentz is a space-time rotation. It's a Lorentz transformation.
I don't know how it become the time of particle two. That part I'm not.
It has to do with space-time geometry. So I mean, you have heard of this vaguely, though, right?
Yeah, I know about Lorentz transformations. I know about entanglement. I don't see how moving a particle at the speed of light even if it's like rotating or whatever, how that would in any way affect the second particle, because time
But
is
that's
relative.
not affecting it, and it's not about affecting the particle. It doesn't affect the particle at all unless you measure it. But the point I'm trying to make is you can imagine a time-like version of entanglement, right? Where instead of being entangled across space, it's now entangled across time and space, right?
With those, how is that different?
They're not. That's the whole point, because it's space and time. Space-time is a joint thing in relativity.
Yeah. So what is rotating a particle in a collider do
It's
differently?
not
So like
rotating it physically, but it's rotating on the
yeah, it's
space-time graph.
in like yeah.
Not that kind of rotation. Sorry, I should have used a linear accelerator, because it confuses the concept of rotation here. Rotating it, you've seen a space-time diagram. It rotates the space-time diagram, not on like the actual in a circle in the actual cyclotron, but on the space-time diagram. One person frame A space becomes time in the other direction, right?
Yeah, it's the little triangle. It's the diamond shape in the PBS space-time thing about how objects moving away from you may or be inside or outside of your time bubble of whether you ever be able to interact with them.
Okay, so the point I'm getting at is that you have the two entangled particles what the quantum state linking them is outside of space, right? And if you accelerate one close to the speed of light, well, now, with at least respect to one frame, that entangled state is now outside of time as well, because the space becomes the time, right?
Sure.
Well, that makes the quantum state timeless, which makes it also eternal.
So that part being outside of space-time doesn't mean it's going to be eternal, because it could just be inside of a different kind of a field that isn't space-time.
A different kind of time, perhaps. Well, eternal in the sense of like what we think of as time. It is outside of our time. So
it's definitely outside of our time. But then whatever that entails could just be it's in a different field of some kind.
Is different kind of okay. Well, maybe a better example would be the universal wave function. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation. In the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, the time variable actually drops out of the equation, and the universal wave function is actually, according to physics, is outside of time necessarily, because there's no time variable present.
Yeah, you can solve the those equations without the time variable. Sure, what was the
Wheeler-DeWitt equation?
Yeah. So I'm totally fine with stuff being outside of space-time. Like, that's totally cool. What is this?
Where is this leading?
What does this lead?
This leads. Remember, you said that they don't want to have God kind of boxed in.
Yeah.
Well, I have some very uncomfortable truth for them. Okay, on theism has very specific limitations on what can and cannot be eternal. Correct?
Sure.
God's eternal. Maybe God's thoughts are eternal, depending on if you're a divine conceptualist or not. But after that, you can't really have anything else being eternal, because that kind of conflicts with divine aseity, doesn't it? Everything else has to be created, right?
Sure.
God's the creator of heaven and earth, right?
Yeah, so only the perfect singularity, the perfect aseity can be truly eternal or whatever.
Yeah, so you have something eternal in physics. This poses a problem. Now, there are ways to square this with theism. The trouble is the only way to square that with theism is to say the universal wave function is either God or a thought in God's mind, right? There's nothing else eternal on physics, on theism, rather.
Well, again, the eternal entailment isn't there. Like, you don't have to say just because something is outside of space-time that makes it eternal. There's no entailment there. Because something's outside of space-time, it could just be contingent on a different type of time or a different kind of field. And so it doesn't have to entail that it's going to be the aseity thing.
You could, but that becomes kind of ad hoc. I mean, you can kind of add that in by hand if you want to, and you can have someone who doesn't like this saying,
I wouldn't say that's ad hoc. So I think it's actually ad hoc to go the other way and say, if it's outside of space-time, let's say there's two possibilities. One, it is a part of the divine aseity. Two, it's a part of a different contingent thing. Which is the more likely reasonable conclusion? The more likely reasonable conclusion is just another contingent thing. To conclude that it's a part of the divine aseity, just because it's outside of our known frame.
Thing. So let's look at eternal and contingent for a second, because that is another category in theism. But the thing is, the only thing that fits that category is God's thoughts, right? Everything else is created. It's like, that's a divine conceptualist. There's God who's eternal. there's God's thoughts which are eternal, but they're also contingent upon God. Like they can't exist without God. So God has a satiety, but these do not have a satiety, yet they are eternal, yet they are also eternally contingent upon God.
Right. So but the point here is simply that if you want to say that something is either a part of the fundamental nature of reality or just another contingent thing that's temporary in some sense, the burden to show that it's part of the necessary thing is significantly higher than the burden to show it's probably just another temporary contingent thing. And so for saying that something's outside of space-time, simply the fact that it's outside of space-time would not be sufficient to conclude that it's a part of the fundamental nature of reality. It would be more rational to conclude it's just another one of the contingent temporary things.
I'm not making a differentiation between, at this point, eternal and not contingent. In fact, the theory does not do that. It doesn't say, like, it just says it's eternal. It can also be eternal and contingent, though. And as far as the theory goes, my theory goes, there's no, it doesn't specify. It can equally well fit either option.
Well, okay, so your argument was that the wave function is outside of space-time. For a Christian, this poses a problem because that means the wave function must be like a thought of God or in God in some sense, because that's like the only way to accept that it's eternal was the word you used there.
Yeah.
I don't see a problem with that. I can say Christians can say that the wave function is outside of space-time, but it's not eternal because it's just a part of a different field, which is contingent on God. And so it's just another layer.
Right, but that's the same thing as the thoughts in God's mind being eternal, but not contingent. It is. I'm not saying it's not contingent. I'm just saying.
Well, those are two different levels. Like the thought of God's mind is like absolute fundamental nature of reality, like one step down. Whereas this could be like a billion steps down and just be like, oh, it's just another pineapple or another tree or another thing. And it's so far away from the God thing that it's not even relevant to God. It's just another domino.
They might say, well, I guess the thing is there's nothing like in the physics that would seem to indicate that like the universal wave function. It just says the time. There's not like an additional variables in the Wheeler-DeWitt equation saying, oh, but it's part of this continuum or that continuum extra. I mean, it could be, but insofar as how we think of time and we categorize the category of time that we use, the universal wave function is not in that category.
Well, so here's a big challenge in apologetics. They can't differentiate between they jump too quickly to the God level of fundamental nature when they don't need to, like all the time, happens all the time.
Right.
Like we can just say that the Wheeler-DeWitt equation is another layer. There's no physics to support this. I agree. There's nothing in physics to say there's another kind of time field that just holds all this other stuff that gets out of space and time. But to say that would explain the data would be a simpler, more elegant hypothesis than to say it is a part of the fundamental nature of reality. The burden of proof to get to the conclusion of it is a fundamental nature of reality is not met simply by saying it's outside of space-time. So,
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, because there could be layers. I mean, you've heard of emanationism as like a metaphysical model, right?
Yeah, there's lots of different possibilities.
In emanationism, there can be like layers upon layers of. There's like God's thoughts up here, but there's also God's thoughts down here, and there's layers like Neoplatonism. You have layers of thoughts going all the way down, and some of them are close to God, and some of them are very close to like the physical world. And there's like,
or like the B theory of time, or that because time is just a bunch of different slices of something. So there's this extra field there that holds all the slices.
Four-dimensional space-time.
Yeah. So there's lots of options, and the part that I'm conflicting with what you're saying is that you're saying that the Christian has a problem when they say that the wave function is eternal because eternal implies godliness. And I'm saying that doesn't exist.
It has to say imply godliness, but it could also mean thoughts in God's mind.
Anything related to God. So there's no entailment that something being outside of space-time has any relation to that final fundamental level of godliness.
The issue then would the universal wave function be created or not, though?
Of course, it would be created.
By time, it's not really like the creation is an event that happens in time, right?
Well, again, so that's the part that isn't an entailment. That's just the wave function not being a part of our time doesn't mean it's outside of all time, because there'll just be a different time, a different field that it's a part of.
But remember you said though, like that is like it goes beyond, but like the physics just says there's you can add these in by hand, but there's no reason to do so from the physics. It's like
right. But remember, the
time as
apologist isn't limited by the physics. The apologist doesn't care about the physical limitations of how physics operates. So they can just say, yeah, that there's no reason.
Yeah, okay, that is true. But that is exactly why I am giving you this argument rather than them. Because I tried this argument with them before, and they will twist and turn away from it. Whereas, well, you know, the atheist community on YouTube, the one thing that they do is kind of prosecute religion, right?
Sure.
So the reason I'm giving you this argument is you're the one who can make them honest. I can't make them honest.
Sure. So yeah, I was only critiquing your claim that you don't see another option for the apologist other than
I see plenty of ways for them to do it in a sense, and the ones you're giving. The trouble is that they're bullshit.
Sure.
And that's the whole point. Like yes, I know they're bullshit. You don't have to convince. You're preaching to the choir there. They are bullshit. But I'm giving you this because this is a way you can say, okay, I can, even if I grant all of your arguments for God's existence, right? They can only lead to this because universal wave function is eternal, and the only way you can square your God concept with this is universal wave function, and therefore we get to quantum idealism, right? And so we have a naturalized quantum idealist picture of God, right?
Well, I wouldn't be able to use that argument because that argument would only work on you because you are limited. You limit your arguments to the constraints of how physics operates, whereas apologists don't limit their arguments.
But you don't. I know they don't. But what I'm saying is you can give them pushback as an atheist.
Well, it wouldn't, for me, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't do anything because they don't limit themselves to the constraints of physics. Using that argument,
really either way.
Yeah, it wouldn't have any effect on them. And so the argument I would bring forth is that you are going beyond what physics is doing, and that would be
and then that's the point. You can point out that what they're doing is disingenuous at that point.
Yeah, that's the argument that I go with. And so
there you go. I'm giving you a new way to establish that they are being disingenuous by you can grant all their arguments. But then when you grant those arguments, you can say, but it only works this way because of these facts of physics. And if you reject these pieces of you know what they actually did. This is really disturbing. Okay. And this is across the board. And this was embarrassing as heck. When I was saying, I actually made some comment. This was embarrassing, and it got taken out of context and sent to Moreland, and it wasn't good between Moore and Moreland. We eventually kind of made up a bit, but there was Craig does this, Ed Fesser does this. This is like universal, like across the board. Okay. You know what they do with the physics?
What?
Do you know what version of quote relativity they adopt? Both Craig and Fesser, as well as all their entire fan bases.
Like the A theory of time, the
Lorentz ether theory.
Why?
You got me. Because they want to have God be the cause of the universe in a strict A-theoretic tense, and they realize that like he's not the actual cause. If it's B theory, it's like, oh come on, it's still a cause in the contingent sense, right? God still the sufficient reason for the universe, even if it's not a cause anymore. So they adopt Lorentz ether theory, which is from a physics standpoint. It's you know what happens when you try and adopt Lorentz physics ether theory.
Well, I don't think that's technically what they're doing. I think they're adopting the A theory of time because it's more intuitive and makes more sense to them.
They do, but then they will. Yeah, that's what they. Then the consequence of that is they will switch to Lorentz ether theory.
Well, I think it's more that an entailment of A theory of time that they're using would entail Lorentz ether theory. I don't think they care as much about that because that part is too beyond the intuitive grasp of their audience.
When like Craig was doing his like foundations of like metaphysical foundations of like a big tome, he actually went in detail discussing and okay, so it depends on which apologist you're talking about. There are some who become like apologist nerds. Okay, the apologist nerd community is big time into arguing. They will go into the past the level of intuition to all the like nitty gritty details, sure. And they will argue Lorentz ether theory, and you try and explain to them, no, that's not how this works. It's at least twice as ad hoc. It's like at least two more premises. One of those additional premises is philosophically problematic and has been known to be philosophically problematic ever since Leibniz, like almost universally across the entire philosophy community. They will argue until you're black and like you'll bang your head into a wall before you can get them to agree.
Sure.
There's something wrong with this. And then they go to Bohmian mechanics. Do you know anything about Bohmian mechanics?
Like the de Broglie pilot wave.
Yeah. Do you know about some of the problems with it?
The hidden variable thing that there requires to have a hidden variable.
Yeah. So they have a hidden variable that obviously, because with your entanglement, the hidden variable has to be faster than the speed of light, right?
Yeah.
So they then say we have to have Lorentz ether theory to keep the hidden variable there, so we can have it going fast. So that way relativity is not literally true; it only looks like it's true, right?
Sure.
And then you have to make a Lorentz ether theory that is doubly ad hoc. But then to make matters worse, you have to have a special pleading exemption to that Lorentz ether theory. So everything else's clocks are retarded except for the Bohmian pilot waves.
Sure. But what is like the level of argumentation that this is at would essentially be like physics paper level stuff. And none of this is taken seriously in physics. Like there's not even
Oh,
a
I
point.
know,
Like,
I know, and that's the problem. It's not just not taken seriously; it's seen as embarrassing.
sure. But from the perspective of the audience, this sounds really smart. And they have like, oh, hey, there's really intelligent people arguing for the existence of God using all this physics stuff. And so I feel justified in believing. And so even
But then that
though
raises the whole issue of disingenuousness. It's like, yeah, you have someone that sounds like he's
well,
talking to somebody who's like,
it doesn't, I wouldn't say disingenuous. I don't think that's true. I think it's more evolutionary than that. I think it's that there is a spectrum of people who genuinely believe a whole bunch of different things. And of those people, they all promote their ideologies in some sense. Genuinely, they genuinely believe this. They genuinely think this. But some of them gain popularity because it intuitively matches with the culture, and some don't. So I don't think they're disingenuous. I think they genuinely believe this, and they're genuinely trying to intellectually pursue their pet ideas, just like every physicist is.
that's true.
It's no different. And it happens to be the case that there is funding socially and financially for this type of thinking because it resonates with the intuitions of the audience base, which is why these types of things get promoted and upheld as opposed to the more stupid things like flat earth, because there's just no base for them. And so I don't think it's disingenuous. I just
Right.
think
I guess the issue I have, and this is maybe a pet peeve, because coming from a physics background, this is like I kind of saw this as my turf, and when I saw this, they're always going to Bohmian mechanics and Lorentz ether theory, neither of which are taken seriously in mainstream academia. And they will then always cite Ed Fesser and Carroll about this, and when you or Ed Fesser and Craig about this, and whenever you try and give them pushback, okay, they argue this slavishly. It's like trying to take like a pet blankie away from a kid. Like they will not give it up.
yeah, that's because at that level, in order for them to realize they're wrong, they would need a deeper understanding of the epistemology of physics, which takes a much better education, which like because most of the people who argue this have like hobbyist pet education in the field, and so they don't have the background knowledge to really understand the epistemic critiques that you're giving. And so of course they're not going to be able to give it up because they aren't cognitively able to understand the value of why your critiques are better than their intuitive acceptance.
That's the other thing, is they don't seem to want to learn either, though. Like when you get to like they'll read. I mean, I've seen them read whole books from Craig or Professor on there, like big fat books. They have entire chapters on things relating to Lorentz ether theory or Bohmian mechanics and so on. But then you say, well, why don't you go pick up a Michio Kaku book at the library or a Stephen Hawking book at the Brian Greene book at the library, and like, oh, we're too busy. Like we don't want to read that. We don't care. Like these are the guys you go to. If you want to do philosophy of religion, you go to an apologist. If you want to do physics, you go to a physicist, like Kaku or Green or so on. They don't want to do that.
That's confirmation bias. You look for the sources that agree with your ideas, and you don't look for the contrary sources.
Yeah, I know. I know you're preaching to the choir, but it was annoying, and it was so annoying because I was like, you can square God with these other models, and you can do so better. I have a model here that's massively superior in like a number of ways. There's actually, I don't know if you know this. There's very sadly, he passed away. Gunter Beckley, you ever heard of him?
I don't think so.
He was a fellow at the Discovery Institute, okay? But he was not like a creationist in the sense of like he accepted evolution like phylogeny. He just thought it was guided, okay? And he was actually a proper scientist, and he went to quantum idealism. He liked my quantum idealism stuff, and he applied it, and he developed a model for how you could explain intelligent design with quantum idealism, including like a mechanism of like McFadden's. I mean, it's a little bit fringe, but it's possible. It's like it's an idea that is bandied about sometimes as an interesting possibility, even if it's not widely believed. But it was actually, he provided a mechanism for how you could have divine guidance of genetic mutations, but in a way that was completely explicable with science. You had like a naturalized God, a quantum idealist God, and you had a naturalized mechanism of design, basically, where this DNA quantum computing the optimal mutation, essentially. And he had this whole thing set up, and it was kind of cool, because it was like he saw this and he's like, yeah, the other ones, they want it to be magic with fairy dust. And it's like, I don't do that. It's like, a fish just popped into the pond with no comment and no ancestor to it. It's like, it doesn't go there. And he's like, he wants an explanation for it. He's like, he was noticing this is a problem. But yeah, like this provides a way to explain all this stuff in a way that they can't explain, and they don't want it to explain that. They want the force without the midi-chlorians, essentially, right? It's like,
well, sort of. So it goes back to what you just said about more benefits, that your way of explaining it has more benefits than theirs. But I wouldn't say that's true. I'd say theirs actually has more benefits. I think yours has more benefits because it aligns with the scientific epistemology and methodology. And so that benefit makes it more palatable for people who are educated in the scientific methodology. But I think the intuitive appeal to using ideas that grasp onto the fallacies and biases of the human mind is a significantly bigger benefit to an ideology.
In the sense of, not in the sense of like trying to actually like the intellectual benefit, but this is more the psychological.
Yeah. So I'm thinking from people's perspectives, which things
as a PR campaign.
For.
This is better as a PR campaign in some sense.
Yeah, because you can say there's probably better mathematical models, probably better intuitive models, probably better models that are fun. Like you can make up different models, and what makes something a benefit versus a consequence is from the person's perspective. What do they like better? What types of things do they like better? And the number of people who like the academic scientific physics approach are mostly atheists. They're mostly people who don't follow God. And so your approach is probably going to fall on deaf ears, because the people who are more likely to listen to it are the ones who are going to go the extra step and say, no, this is all explained naturally. And so, I mean, I agree with your methodology, and it's far better than like Craig,
right? Well,
but there's an even better thing there, which is just naturalism. And so,
but it's
the other side,
my model is that is naturalized theism. It is a naturalism. Like
I'm going for like the naturalism,
the materialist naturalism. I get.
Yeah. So, but if you're the two,
I don't think that's better, but that's a whole other matter.
Well, I'm sure you don't, but that's but we do. The people
you guys do.
The other people who are extremely educated in that same methodology, the majority of people who love the methodology you're using are atheists, and the people who you're talking to who share your ideology hate that methodology. And so you're in this very weird middle ground of trying to use a methodology that is predominantly used by atheists, and then try to promote this methodology to a group of theists who hate it.
Right. Well, when I was doing this, when I was first jumping into apologetics, as I had this discovery from the physics as well as I was going into philosophy of mind, where I did, philosophy minor at the time. I eventually got a philosophy master's, and I had this like realizing this better fits like an idealist type of picture of the world, right? And I was with the social context of the time, though, it was the new atheism had just appeared. It was like late Bush era, early Obama era, right? And they had this whole development where you had, the new atheism was coming afoot, and it was producing. And I don't know if you agree with this. People have told me that you agree with this. I think that religion has like some socially useful benefits. Like
yeah, I did a debate with Aaron Ra. Said, does religion cause more harm than good in society? And my position was that overall it causes more good than harm.
Yeah, so I saw this. I had a professor of mine when I was younger. He was a student of a guy named Leo Strauss at University of Chicago. You know who that is?
Mm-hmm.
Leo Strauss, and is a very strange thing. When his professor his first day in class, he said something I felt was very weird. He said, "I'm an atheist," but then he added, "But the people who take crucifixes out of public buildings, those are not real atheists. Those are just idiots trying to get on television. I'm like, well, this is an odd thing to say. Like, most of the atheists I had known were people who were, the boisterous new atheists who want to let's tear religion apart and make a public show of it and so on, right?
Sure.
And so Strauss, now I eventually adopted Strauss's philosophy, but not his. He personally was either an atheist or agnostic, and he had other people under him who were like this, right? He had this idea. He kind of combined Plato with Nietzsche, and he said Plato's political philosophy. You have the philosopher kings are on top, right? You have the soldier class in the middle. You got the workers in the bottom. And the reason that this was needed, he said, was that the philosopher kings knew the dangerous truth. The dangerous truth is that there is no God, there are no moral absolutes. The problem is you can't tell the public this. If the public knows this, guess what's going to happen? All hell's going to break loose. Right?
Sure, sort of.
Okay, so you can't tell them the truth. You got to tell them a lie, right? A noble lie. Well, those lies were organized religion and the myth of the nation, or like why our nation is the best nation, etc. Right? And it's
just laws in general.
Okay, so maybe that's another way of doing it too. But these are like two examples they give that are prominent in Straussian circles. There's like a whole philosophy called Straussianism, and so the idea was you want to. The reason the soldier class is in the middle is, number one, they're the enforcer class, but number two, they're the class that is most likely to believe these two things. You go, an average soldier is going to be highly patriotic. They're also going to be religious, right?
Sure.
Okay. They're the ones who uphold, they're the public face. The philosopher kings are not to be seen. They're the gray eminence behind the throne, as it were, right? They run the society, but you don't ever see them. You don't even know they're there. The soldier class looks like it's on top, but it's not really, but they're the ones who promote the noble lies, as it were, right?
Sure.
And they promote it to the public because that way, if the public learns the truth, and remember when Voltaire was saying, he had that one cocktail party with his friends, he said, basically, like, there is no God, but don't tell my servant. Like the servant marks in the room, like, everyone be quiet now about God not existing. We can't have discussion of that when the servant's around, because if he gets a wind of this, he's going to kill the rich, basically, right?
Sure, it was more of a probabilistic statement. So I was saying that if the majority of impoverished people believed in a God, that would help them to be motivated in times where they were not given very much or very struggling. And so they were more likely to be complacent or compliant because they had this belief in this afterlife and they're supposed to do these moral things. And so they're less likely to cut the heads off of the rich. Whereas if you have a more atheistic society or populace, they are less likely to tolerate mistreatment and are more likely to revolt. And so keeping these kinds of religious ideologies made the populace more docile in many ways.
Right. So now, but here's the thing. I saw this, and there were certain issues I cared about very much politically, like abortion, for example, right? And I realized, I noticed that, for the life of me, I never understood what people say. I kind of get why they say it, because there's a lot of overlap between the pro-life community and religion, right? But for the life of me, I never understood why it had to be religious. I just thought, well, this is a human right to life, right? This is not a matter of religion. This is a matter of human rights. And yet I'm seeing that, Christopher Hitchens even pointed this out. He said he had a problem with his fellow secularists that they weren't able to get that this was a important thing, right? There's a baby, unborn child, and it has rights, and they don't get it. And he said he was kind of frustrated with this and all this. But then I recognized, well, if I want to promote this, but I noticed that, there's this big new atheism wave coming out, right? I got to find a way to bolster religion in such a way that it's and recognize the dialectic, because your side was using the scientific methodology, right? Whereas my side wants, well, God did it by God power with fairy dust, right? Yeah. And I recognize you fit scientific methodology versus God did it by God power plus fairy dust. Which one's going to win over the long term?
Depends how long term you're talking.
Maybe mid-long term. I'm saying in the span of my lifetime, not in the span. Long term, you're going to have evolutionary psychology coming in. Every time you have atheism, mass atheism in a society, the experiment usually lasts around 100 years or less. It's an approximate span of 100 years, and then it's because of evolutionary. There's something to do with religion and evolutionary psychology, where You know, it's like religious people tend to have more kids.
Yeah.
It's a matter of that. It's just simply a matter of fecundity and how it relates to religious belief. And it's I don't know if you know this, but like they've seen instances of chimpanzees in the wild seemingly doing things that look like animistic, like they would imply a belief in animism, basically.
Yeah. Well, so like what comes to mind to me. So the reason, what happens when we get technologically to the point where we don't need to have kids anymore, atheism wins, religion all dies, essentially. It's just gone.
Right.
Until then, we need ideologies that promote certain kinds of social actions, like the Islam has the highest birth rate because they have like 20 kids or whatever. And so there's the ideology makes the populace more docile and more adaptable to the evolutionary needs of what our biological requirements are for now. And so in the like next 1,000 or so years, we're going to start from William Lane Craig was right, and his ideology is going to promote or maintain religion for the most people because it's the most intuitive and it'll grasp the most hearts, essentially. His method, I think, was right. Then we're going to get to the point where once we get AI overlords and life is essentially eternal as much as we want it, we don't need kids and people can live to age 400, atheism wins. That's going to be the scientific method. The scientific method is going to win.
Without transhumanism intervening, like without the Methuselarity. So pre-Methuselarity, you have a situation beforehand where like as a species, like if you take the technology out of it, right? Look at human history. Every civilization had a religion of some kind. And it was kind of like an institutional state. I mean, there's like the predominant religion of this country, as it were. You know, like Rome had Roman paganism, and India.
Yes, having an ideology to motivate people to have certain kinds of social actions is the most effective way to maintain a society.
Okay, so what I was getting at is I saw this happening. Okay, and I'm like, I recognize that the long term, you're going to pit this scientific worldview against God did it with fairy dust, right? The scientific worldview will win in the long term, and especially when you have this aggressive. There was a very aggressive, it was a campaign basically to like make the population less religious. And I'm like, from someone like me who cares about certain religion-dependent political issues, not religion-dependent in the sense of they have to be religious, but that the people who are more inclined to support my political goals are also going to be religious, right? This is going in the wrong direction. And so I realized, well, the thing that makes the new atheist thing tick is the scientific methodology. Well, I'm going to make a theism with a scientific methodology built into it.
I understand your reasoning, but I think I disagree with you. I think William Lane Craig's method will win out prior to
just
AGI.
because people are
stupid
at the time. Maybe it's in the long term you might be right simply because of how people think. Like they're not purely rational. I mean, they are irrational animals, but they have like they have like instincts and so on. And apologetics as a game is an instinctive.
Like it's playing on people's intuitions, fallacies, biases, and those things govern more of people's lives.
They're much stronger than the head. I noticed.
Yeah. So like most people don't.
No, in the short term, I was able to inject something in the short term. And I think that did. There was actually it was kind of crazy watching the quantum idealism thing blow up at first. Like, Inspiring Philosophy ran off with it, and then we had a guy named Kent Forbes, Fairwind Films. He made a made-for-TV documentary based directly on my stuff, and it was like he had like over 1 million views at one point. And like the whole idea went viral now to like you can see aspects of quantum idealism, like another people adopting versions of the idea here or there.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely branches of apologetics who are taking a more intellectual approach and would definitely be interested in that for sure.
All right, so it was kind of cool to see this. So that was, and so in the short midterm, what I was doing was necessary because it was like this kind of it put a bullet in the hole. We're atheists and we have science, and you can't do anything, because we're just going to march the science forward and push you out. And like, oh wait, we have this quantum idealism thing, which totally undoes the materialist versus dualist dialectic. It's like the third, they get hit from the side from out of left field, basically,
Sure, in the sense that you can provide a more academic argument for God than like what Craig is doing. In that sense, yes, you made progress in the field of a more scientific apologetics than the Craigians.
Yeah, so it was kind of cool to see. And so in the short term, it did. In the midterm, actually, it did some good. It kind of calm. It provided enough pushback on the new atheist community that then enabled the Craig approach to. Actually, another example would be Jordan Peterson, where he's not like he's kind of he does apply like this sort of it's psychology he's playing on essentially in some senses, you know.
Well, I would say he is taking the intuition fallacies, biases approach to its extreme and trying to use essentially pure people's intuitions in order to get motivation and following. And I think it's working extremely well.
It works. It
Yeah.
works.
So like that was my point earlier, is that the intuition side, is going to win out in the midterm as opposed to the scientific methodology side. The intuition side is far stronger until we get to the AGI live forever kind of stage.
Yeah. Now, so I mean, you can see here that my approach is better, and it seems like, you know, they might say there's maybe an additional time continuum or so on that the universal wave function can live in, but like I think you can see here like how the universal wave function being eternal really doesn't give much more of an option between quantum idealism versus atheism if we just apply what we know from science now, you know.
Yeah, that would lead to the problem of where I would see a problem with your worldview, which is how do you get to that fundamental level? Because I think you essentially can't. I think that's just not even a thing. I think it's always
more like a metaphysical fundamental level.
Like, yeah, the God's aseity or his thoughts kind of a level. I think there's nothing that gets there. Nothing.
Well, I do have. Okay, so this is a whole other issue, and this is something I want to do some videos on it because I'm still doing quantum idealism. I find quantum idealism very interesting, and it'll even include some videos out there that I'm sure apologists will be able to use in the future, even though I'm not doing apologetics proper anymore, where, you know, whenever quantum idealism like branches over into theology, I will find that interesting too, you know, like, but there was this issue of ontophysics, okay? And it's a very fascinating thing where you could start with pure metaphysical ontology, okay? So like there's no science going into this at all. It's just pure like abstract metaphysics. And then you would then use that to derive things that come out of physics. An example of this is we got the superposition principle complete with many worlds in it out of pure idealist metaphysics. Now that I don't know if you can complete that program or not. Like you can make a complete, like, you know, let's say that in the future they have a grand unified theory. Can we get like the entire theory out of pure metaphysics? I don't know if that's possible.
Oh, I would go the other way. I'd say that there's infinitely many metaphysics approaches that could get all of those things. Underdetermination is just, you would always, as long as you have enough time and creativity, you're going to be able to come up with infinitely many metaphysical approaches
not always the same. So like Democritus said, the most fundamental things in the world are atoms and the void, right?
Sure.
And that does not drive you. The whole notion of emergent spacetime is very alien to that concept. Whereas if you go with Leibniz, monadology, he gets you back emergent spacetime. Then he has this whole thing about how the monads are correlating. All the causes and effects as we see are the way they are because the monads are correlating things in such a way to make it appear that way in space-time. And it was weird because it was like, wait a minute. I didn't even notice this until I passed it through chat. And like chat's like, can you show me the parallels? And the chat writes this thing about how he's talking about the monads causing these correlations. I'm like, chat's like, that's entanglement.
Well, so my argument's going a little bit deeper than that. I'm saying that of all the ideas humans have ever had relative to metaphysics is only a infinitesimally small amount of the possible ideas of metaphysics that could exist. Given, say, AGI or whatever, that can explore all of the possible ways or hypotheses around metaphysics that could exist that we haven't even thought of yet. There's going to be infinitely many that you can start with some model of metaphysics and then reverse engineer all of the facts of physics. There's going to be infinitely many of these. It's just basic underdetermination. There are infinitely many theories that can explain all empirical data equivalently. And so
can you predict physics from metaphysics? That's the real kicker, though. Like you put the blinders on, you like, we're not going to look at the outside world at all. Can you start from pure metaphysics and then say, and therefore, because of my metaphysical model, I predict that this type of phenomenon will exist in nature, and then let's go out and see if it does.
Yeah, that would be the best, most reasonable one to believe, but the same thing applies. There's going to be infinitely many that can do that because there are going to be infinitely many that make every
That may
variety of
be true, but
predictions.
a lot of those I've noticed have a lot of overlap. Like Leibniz has overlap with Neoplatonism and some other things. Like there's, you see what I'm saying?
Well, that's true in all human cultures. There's always overlap because of all of our ideas are essentially based
Like
in the
they're to
same
the point
mental
where
structure.
they're completely compatible. Not to the point like it's just like there's like part of this system has this part of this system and so on. But like you could in theory combine them and say, oh, they're saying the same thing from two different angles essentially.
It's the same thing with languages. Like all languages are essentially compatible because they're all saying representing the same things. I don't think that's because the ideas are necessarily tying into something fundamental of reality. I think it's because the ideas are tying into something fundamental of how the human brain works or how mammal brain works. And once we get to the stage of AGI where it can explore all possibilities, essentially, it will find a diversity of differences that we haven't thought of yet. So I don't think that there's just some entailment that all of these ideas are tying into the fundamental nature of reality because there is a correlation. That's just how we think.
Maybe. Well, I mean, if metaphysics has any validity as a discipline, it would seem to make sense that it could predict certain things about reality that could maybe then end up showing up in our physics. Like before.
Sure, that would be my requirement for anything to be valid, is that the hypothesis has to make predictions about the future to be
It
rational
can't
to
just be
believe.
floating around and having no
Post
attachment.
hoc explanation. It can't just explain past data and then be done. It doesn't. No, we don't care.
Yeah. Hold on, my alarm thing is. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So, so I think you were. I think we beforehand you agreed though that like my kind of model would be it could be. It's the only way you could really make sense of theism from kind of your perspective, or it's like you could see why my approach is much more amenable to like an atheist, right?
Yeah, because it agrees more with the scientific
It
methodology
doesn't
by
really make
making.
sense to have a version of theism that doesn't match what I'm describing here, especially given the whole universal wave functions, eternality, and so on.
It doesn't make sense when you use the scientific methodology to have a model that doesn't use the scientific methodology. And so I think that because me and most atheists adopt the scientific methodology, your approach is more amenable to us. But that just means it doesn't make sense to us who likes the scientific methodology. For most people, they don't really care. It's not really that important.
Right. All right. Now, I was sitting on something, and I kept this real quiet, okay, like for over 10 years, because I knew that if it came out, and this first started when I was very young. I was, I think, age 14 when I realized that like the whole notion of magic in the pejorative fairies and pixie dust sense, right, didn't make any sense. Like God just did it by God power. Like, well, that's not an acceptable explanation. I believe there's a God, but that there has to be a reason for all this stuff, right?
Sure.
And then the next year, I did this. Like, I was like just doing metaphysics for the fun of it, right? Let's see if I can derive everything from like pure reason. And I got to something that looked kind of like Leibniz's monadology, right? And in the process, I had this like it was kind of like proto quantum idealism. It was like quantum idealism minus the physics at this point. I got to ideas like reality has to be made of information and so on. Like that was one of the things I had thought of before, this whole quantum idealism thing came about. And then I had like things like I could explain like the whole notion of the fallen state being correlated to the knowledge of good and evil and so on, right? And I noticed around me, like I talked to my mom about this, like, well, it's just because God said don't eat from the tree, and so that's why it's like, well, that doesn't explain why it's this tree rather than that one that caused it, and like, what does this knowledge of good and evil thing have to do with the fall, for example, right? And I noticed like no one at church had understood this. No one, none of there were no like apologetics books that explained this. There was nothing that explained this, right? And yet I'm able to get these results out of my metaphysical system, right? And if you talk to the average Christian, they would say this is all revealed theology, right? Like, notice like how did God create the universe in Genesis?
Magic.
But specifically, what did he do?
He spoke it words into existence.
And now this is the thing that was fascinating because none of the Christians at church noticed this. My mom didn't notice this. The people of the apologetics community did not notice this. But I noticed this immediately. I said, my metaphysics says the universe is made of information. Well, information is words. How do you create a world? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's something that I saw this in the Bible, and I'm like, no one else did. And it was.
What is that? That seems like an argument from analogy. I don't think words.
Well, maybe it was an argument from
information.
analogy, but it was, to me, like a 15-year-old mind at this point. This was a clue. Okay.
Sure.
This is like, wait a minute. I mean, yes, it's an analogy, but you're 15 years old and you're thinking a little more literally about this, and you're like, this was still a clue. It's like, wait a minute, is anyone else seeing what I'm seeing here? Like, I noticed you could actually make sense of how God created the universe with words, if the universe is made of information in the first place, right?
Well, I understand the intuitive appeal of the analogy, but I don't think words are going to.
If you were to take the analogy as literal. I'm
Sure.
not saying you have to, but if you were to do this, and keep in mind, at this time I'm born into a fundamentalist household, so this is like, I would take the Bible literally. I believe that yes, the world was created 6,000 years ago, and the dinosaurs marched up Noah's Ark, just like Kent Hovind said so, and so on and so forth. So it was all like literal. So when God spoke the universe into existence, he literally spoke the universe into existence, and then I'm not taking it as an analogy, I'm taking it as literal, and so then I have this metaphysics at the same time, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this can explain how God did that. Whereas you go and you talk to a Christian about it, like, one of my uncles, I think this part of this conversation once came up when I was in Canada with my uncle and aunt and grandparents. We were on like the West Coast, and we were talking about this, and like a campsite, and my uncle's like, Johan is a very bright kid, but this is getting too far. This is getting into like the act of creation itself or something. Like, it's like, trying to explain all this is like, because the average Christian doesn't think you're supposed to be able to know how the creation event happened, right?
Yeah, God works in mysterious ways.
Whereas with me, I'm explaining it, and I'm explaining it in a way, I'm like, noticing no one else around me knows this. The pastors don't know this. The apologists don't know this. My parents don't know this. No one at church knows this. And I'm seeing all this. I'm like, you can get revealed theology. What they would say, and the only way you could know this is if God told you, right?
I guess so.
Like, according in their worldview, in their way of thinking, the only way you could know this is God said, I did it this way, because, and you can't know that unless I tell you, you can't know, because I did it by magic, and your mind cannot understand magic.
Sure.
Okay, so, but then I'm able to see the magic, as it were, right? I can actually see it and see how it's explained, and it kind of get a head trip in a sense. It's like, wait a minute, that stuff they're claiming is magic, I know how they did it, and no one else does. See?
Sure, but what is the connection there? Where's that leading?
The connection is later on I discovered that I was not the first person to figure this out.
Sure, books exist to show man's original ideas are not so original.
Well, yes, I know, but there's a specific category of ideas, and these are ideas that were, shall we say, off limits to religion, okay? And nevertheless, were underneath religion in some sense. Like, I noticed a lot of this. It was in a whole lot of, not just Christianity, but a lot of religions, and I had to keep that part quiet, because it's like, I noticed parallels were showing up in other religions too, and I'm still a Christian, but it's like a non-institutional kind of Christian. I don't go with the whole, use like the Catholic, Orthodox, and capital P Protestant branch. I don't do that anymore. Like, I think the last piece of that came off this year in some sense. Kyle Allender?
Mm-hmm.
He does Christian idealism on YouTube. Okay, he was a Catholic, and he deconverted from Catholicism, and I realized there's a lot of, after he deconverted from Catholicism, and then he noticed like showing like how certain concepts in Christianity, as we think of it, actually derive from Catholicism, and how there are certain things are unfounded. I was like, wait a minute, there's a lot of Catholic DNA in Protestantism, and I'm still a Protestant in the sense that I quote protest the Catholic Church, as it were, like in the sense I'm not a Catholic, right? But I'm not a capital P Protestant either anymore, in the sense that like all the things that they adopt essentially is like a kind of a creedally based view instead. But okay, so let me see here. So let me give you some examples of this. I won't tell you where this is going off right off the bat, but I'm going to show you where this is. Like, I'm gonna do a reveal at the end of this and show you where this is all going.
Okay.
So you remember in let's start with the introspective argument. IP's introspective argument video. You had that one line in there at the end. The conclusion was, "All is mind. The universe is a mental construct." Right?
Sure.
It's a statement of idealism. Then we have the next part was, this is a kind of an interesting piece of metaphysics. You have the emergent universe video, right? That was that kind. Remember, he used the same argument in the debate he had with you.
Maybe I don't remember his videos from that long ago.
Okay, so remember when he had his debate with you?
Yep.
And he used like basically had like there's emergent space time and then emergent space time emerges from quantum cognition.
Sure.
And when you the extension of that, and you see this in his, I don't know if he did in his debate with you or not, but he had it in the video. I gave him I gave him part of this. I didn't have anything to do with the whole galaxy to neuron thing at the end of it, but I gave him the rest of the outline for that video, and it was based on an older video I made called "Through a Mirror Darkly" back in early 2014. And in the video, they get this whole thing of space-time is emerging from a shared inner space, right? So like, it's God's mind, but we also have access to it in a sense, a small access, and the rest of it's kind of subconscious to us, right?
Yep.
So think like Carl Jung's collective unconscious. Essentially what it's saying is external space emerges from what is essentially Carl Jung's collective unconscious.
Okay.
Part of the metaphysical system. And now with that, you should have correspondences. Like you should have things that like will show up as like archetypes, you know, Jordan Peterson talk here, like Jungian archetypes and so on in your collective inner space that then show up in external reality, right?
Okay.
There's external space corresponds to internal space, right?
Sure.
Then, okay, now this next part is a bit technical. Okay. I want you to imagine this as like a metaphysical system. If you don't see where this is going right now, just trust me, it's going to sound a little weird at first. Just like, let's just see where this goes, okay? Okay, well, I'm going to give you a couple of statements, and each one of these statements, okay, I want you to tell me if you can recognize the parallel with physics, right?
All right.
Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates.
And entropy?
No, everything has a vibration state, right?
Okay, so like the quantum field
quantum
energy.
wave function. Now, let's see here. Okay, the next part of this, I want you to imagine, okay, you don't have to believe in parapsychology, okay? Imagine for a second that telepathy is real, as like a game, okay?
Okay.
If telepathy were real, how would you explain it in physics?
Usually probably some kind of mirroring effect between patterns in the brain.
No, like actual, like if it's like literal, like
entanglement
telepathy, like in the real paranormal sense, where there's actually like it's not just a mirroring effect, where it's like you actually got like something that looked like magic to you. Like someone is actually picking up your thoughts in such a way you're like, holy shit, how did you figure that out?
Probably some EM wave, something.
But like EM waves, obviously, they reduce with distance, right? There's like a, you drive across the radio signal dies out pretty fast, right? And then plus our brains are not even built like transmitters. They're, 1/4.
So if you're talking about like infinite distance, then entanglement?
The entanglement, exactly. And you can get around, there are some physics problems with how that would work that people bring up, but if you model it with quantum idealism, you get around both of them. You get around both the speed of light limit, and you also get around the whole no communication theorem, because you're never actually extracting information from the wave function. Your mind already is in superposition in the first place, so it's just in superposition with someone else. Okay, so the blank teachings go much further than do those of modern science. They teach that all manifestation of thought, emotion, reason, will, desire, or any mental state or condition are accompanied by vibrations, a portion of which are thrown off, which tend to affect the minds of other persons by induction. This is the principle which produces the phenomenon of telepathy, mental influence, and other forms of the action and power of mind over mind. Okay, so if you have telepathy, as you said, you'd have to explain it with entanglement, right? So the kind of vibration we're talking about here would seem to kind of have something that has quantum non-locality, right? It would violate, Bell's inequalities in some way, right?
Yeah, because like information with the collapse between brains wouldn't make sense. Because
okay,
you'd be able to read lines. Like there's tons of information that you'd have to.
Let's dial back to the 19th century. You don't quite know about space-time yet, okay? So we're going to use the word ether instead, because that's the closest thing they had to a concept of space-time at that point in time. We'll just dub the word ether in for space-time. The universal ether, which is postulated by science without its nature being understood clearly, is held by the blank to be but a higher manifestation of that which is erroneously called matter. That is to say, matter at a higher degree of vibration, and is called by them the ethereal substance. Okay, so now you may not know about this, but this actually shows up in physics in 2004. This ties into the whole space-time emergence from quantum entanglement thing, okay? They have this thing called a string net liquid, and a string net liquid is a highly organized system of quantum entanglement. So it's not just like two particles are entangled. It's a highly complex, entire system is entangled with all of its parts, and it's a highly complex system, okay? And there's like a whole field of study where you study the properties of these string net liquids, and there's you've heard of a topological, I think IBM tried to come up with a topological quantum computer recently.
Sure.
It was like last year. It was based on, they were basing it on string net liquids. Okay, so what they said though is this is from 2004. Xiaogang Wen and Michael Levin discovered that space-time behaves as a vast network of entanglements, and basically what they also then showed was there are types of, here's from the New Scientist article. They also found that the string net theory naturally give rise to other elementary particles such as quarks, which made up protons and neutrons, and the particles responsible for some of the fundamental forces such as gluons and the W and Z bosons, okay? So in other words, you oscillate the string net liquid, and the string net liquid is what space-time is made of, but if you vibrate it, you actually get, as some of the solutions of this, subatomic particles back, okay? Constituents of matter. So it's like a unified picture of matter and space-time, right? And it kind of matches what was described here before of matter being the same thing as ether, just like it's a different manifestation of the ether, essentially, right?
All right.
All right. And then we have, okay, not only this, but that even the all in itself manifests a constant vibration of such an infinite degree of intensity and rapid motion that it may be practically considered as at rest. It sounds like paradoxical at first, but it's describing, vibration building up, but then all of a sudden it, like, once you get to the whole thing, it's like essentially at rest. Like it's a frozen vibration, right?
Frozen vibration.
Well,
so like
if
Bose-Einstein condensate, like, or
well,
are you
okay,
talking
hold on here. Okay, so two things. It's the all. Okay, so what is the all? That's like the universe, right?
Sure.
So I have a wave function for the entire universe, right? If we treat this as a wave function.
Okay.
Well, how fast is the universal wave function vibrating? Trick question.
Speed of light? I don't know.
Well, no, because we discussed this just earlier in the show. Universal wave function is not in time. It's outside time. It's frozen.
Okay.
Okay, it's at rest, right? So you see the parallel now? The vibration of the all is at rest?
Maybe.
Okay, because it's like, it's outside of time. It's literally frozen in time. That's about as close as you get to being at rest.
That seems like a stretch for the analogy. Because again, I wouldn't say...
Maybe that last one was a bit of a stretch. Okay. All of these statements come from a document that you recognize the distinctive parallels here between the vibration concept and the wave function, right?
Sure.
Okay. These all come from a document that predates quantum mechanics.
Well, actually, I would say it can come from like hundreds of them. I think you can find parallels in many, many books of things that you can make an argument from analogy for that could fit all of those different things.
Okay, well, these all also correlate to in the rest of this book, it goes across a metaphysical system that also correlates outer space to inner space. Remember I said before remember the analogy I gave in IP's emergent universe argument, where you got outer space emerging from inner space?
Sure.
Okay, you know what the Latin word for hidden is by any chance?
Nope.
Oculare. It's the root of the English word occult, which means to hide. All of these come from an occult system known as Hermeticism, which is supposed to be like it's an ancient Egyptian occult system.
Okay.
And if you notice that whole, okay, here's an example. Remember that whole thing of outer space emerging from inner space?
Yeah.
You ever heard of the statement "as within, so without"?
Sure.
Like the kind of the new age part of YouTube, perhaps, or like spiritual people or like esoteric minded people.
Yeah, the Reiki community.
That statement right there, that is the core principle of what makes Hermeticism hermetic. Now, you might say there's mentalism, which is a bit more important, but mentalism is ubiquitous. A lot of systems are idealist, right? And so in that sense, yeah, they're going to have their mentalism principle, as it were. But that one where you have the as within, so without statement of like outer space corresponds to inner space and one emerges in the other one, that is a quintessentially hermetic concept. And so the little secret I've been sitting on this whole time is that quantum, and there's a book. The reason what I was reading this from was that there was a book in 2018. It's called The Quantum Hermetica. You can find it on Amazon. It's recommended, actually. It's really short. It's like less than 100 pages. And there's a couple of authors. They use like 3 models. One of them is actually my model. Another one is Hoffman's conscious realism. And the third one is a generic emergent spacetime from quantum cognition, which is the thing that IP used in his debate. And they use all 3 of these, and they go systematically taking that physics model, okay, and they derive they go like, it's like not like a lot of times when people do this, they give like a bland like parallels, and they're like, well, this sort of fits this, and so we're just kind of like mystically woo our way into saying this is this, right?
Sure.
That's not what they did. They had it's like a very thorough, they go line by line, and they say, here's the physics behind it, and we're going to derive the physics very carefully, and then they have like back everything up. I forget exactly how many citations it has, but it's well over 100 citations. It's like 150 some citations, and it's like only a 100-page book. And they go through step by step, showing like deriving the entire system of Hermeticism from quantum idealism.
Okay, and what?
And I was aware of some of this. I didn't know the full extent, but when I made the whole, the argument that became IP's emergent universe argument, I knew when I was creating that was Hermeticism, but I didn't tell anybody because I knew if I bring this out, it's going to cause pandemonium.
Why do you think that would cause pandemonium?
Because it's occult. What happens when you talk about occultism among the Christian apologist community or among Christians in general?
Oh, so you mean like the implication that this sources from something other than Christianity would cause
something other than Christianity, but it's not just something like for example, when Aleister Crowley was doing his black magic rituals and all this, what he was basing it on? Like the overarching system he was basing it on?
Hermeticism?
Yeah. No, I don't recommend playing with that stuff, but yes.
So what is the so what? What is the point?
Well, it's funny because the argument I was giving, I was just sitting on this whole time and realized I'm not doing apologetics anymore. Why don't I just put this out there? Because it's kind of because remember when you had the debate with Aaron Ra about religion causing whether it's harmful or not?
Yeah.
And I would side with you more, but then when he had his debate with IP, the actual statement of the debate was different, right? It was, is Christianity harmful, right?
Yeah.
Or dangerous. I think it was the word dangerous. And technically speaking, in that debate, even though when in his debate with you, I'd have to side with you because I think that Christianity is more beneficial than not, right?
Sure.
But in the Aaron Ra versus Michael Jones debate, I'd have to side with Aaron Ra because I've been damaged by religion in some ways.
Yeah, clearly it can be very dangerous and very harmful, and
like
so that's why he specifically asked for the title change, because Aaron essentially asked for the same IP debate title, and I asked if changing it was okay specifically for that reason. So I would agree with your assessment there. That's why I specifically phrased the debate.
Said that I would never have the debate. I would never find and he had the same exact debate with Trent Doherty, actually. I was actually planning on doing a video of why I would never participate in that kind of debate specifically. I was interested in your debate with him, but I would not participate in the debate I had with him and Michael Jones or him and Trent Doherty, simply because it's too polarized and it doesn't get, whenever that it comes up, it's rare that the proper nuance is given to it,
Well, I would say more that the way it's phrased gives Aaron a very softball answer to it. Like, can Christianity cause harm? Yes, obviously. And then so making it more, does it cause more harm than good would be a better question.
Then that
because you can ask the same question about, say, nuclear weapons. Are nuclear weapons dangerous? Clearly.
Yes.
But did nuclear weapons lead to more positive outcomes than negative outcomes? Yes. Nuclear power plants have saved more lives than nuclear weapons have killed.
Right. So, yeah. So, but what I was going to say, though, was that if this comes out, it actually opens up a possibility for, in some senses, reforming religion. Because now you have an objective foundation for religion. Remember what I said before is you have this, basically what the physics only allows, if you stick with the physics and scientific methodology, the only options the scientific methodology allows for are atheism or quantum idealism. the universal wave function being eternal, barring all kinds of weird ad hoc additions that apologists can add to it. If we just go with the science as is and treat it like a normal scientific theory without extra, or adding on convoluted things like Lorentz ether theory and so on. If we just treat the science as is, what the science is telling us is the only way you can have God existing is quantum idealism, essentially. And then that, in turn, creates a foundation on which you can make religion objective, okay? It's a matter of, you can say, someone instead of saying, well, should we kill the gays? Well, let's look it up in the Bible. In Leviticus, it says we should stone a man, something like that, right? And you have things in Texas where there's a guy's like saying, yeah, we should actually kill the gays because we should have laws to kill the gays because it says so in Leviticus. It's like, wait a fat second here. This is a problem, And there's no check on it because they're going to say go to the Bible, and that's in a determinist point of what decides the argument, right?
Sure.
Whereas with this, now we have a way of checking and balancing that. We can say, well, hold on here. It does say that here, but that's not the ultimate authority because we don't know if that we can falsify statements. Beforehand, you could not falsify statements in religion. There's science category over here, right? And science had the access to the natural world, whereas religion is over here, right? And religion gets to talk about the supernatural, right? And so science can never actually make statements about the supernatural in a sense. Like that's often religion land. You can never actually encroach upon that territory.
Wait, so how would you falsify that statement given your ideology?
Well, you'd have to find some way to falsify quantum cognition. I don't know how you do that, but I don't know how you do that.
The question was, given any statement in the Bible, you should drown babies or whatever, how would you falsify that statement given your ideology?
Well, that one I would probably go with universal intersubjectivity. Morality has to be based on like God's morality, right? God's morality has to be the same. It has to be universally intersubjective because God's frame is universally intersubjective. So God is actually seeing through you and me and IP and everybody else.
Well, that doesn't seem like a falsification. For it to be a falsification, it has to be tested.
Well, no, I'm setting up a theory before we can falsify anything. We got to set up a theory. We got to derive something out of the theory, right?
Well, sure, but I can just grant the theory. What would the test be?
Well, so whether or not something would violate universal intersubjectivity, whether it's moral according to all frames, if those frames are sufficiently given sufficient knowledge, shall we say.
I still don't see how that would be like a testable falsification because that entails you have to start with the assumption of your hypothesis. And then if this assumption is true, say...
What I'm saying there, the assumption of quantum idealism here is the backdrop of that is we've already falsified the universal wave function being eternal has already falsified all the other theisms. We know the other theisms are false because the universal wave function is eternal, and you can only have an eternal object in theism if that object is either God or one of God's thoughts.
Sure, but I can just grant that and still say, well, how do you falsify a particular sentence in the Bible?
So if that is true, though, then an entailment of that statement is morality has to be universally intersubjective because it defines God in a certain way. It gives God certain concrete properties that we can actually go out and we can imagine how it's not just like random, divine revelation comes down and downloads an NPC update in someone's head. And then they give, they get instructions that no one can reason against because they come from God. And therefore it's above all, you can't make any, no argument against it is permissible, shall we say, right?
Well, the problem I'm seeing is that say you get the person who doesn't like whatever from the Bible and says their interpretation is right and they disagree with your interpretation and they say, let's say they just grant the quantum cognition model and just say but their interpretation of the quantum cognition model agrees with their intuitive understanding of a particular Bible phrase.
Well,
how would you say that your interpretation is and their interpretation are which one's right?
The issue there is there's only, maybe you could, obviously, because people have different interpretations of science. That's why we have, 24 different quantum interpretations, right? But at the same note of that, it may not be a perfect thing like this, but it would be able to tighten things down a bit by saying by at least grounding it on something concrete, you can come back and you kind of corner the animal in the box better, shall we say, of saying, well, we know it can't be this because if it's this, then it contradicts this fact of science over here. And they can say, we have some other interpretation. You get to a certain extent with that, but it's not a complete free-for-all where it's, because the whole notion of divine revelation, the notion of like revelational epistemology and magic, like the notion of something being, magical in the pejorative sense, they actually go along very well together. Because in this one, the whole notion of magic is you cannot access it with human reason, right?
Sure.
You can't understand how God made the universe or how God split the loaves of bread apart and so on, right?
Sure.
Okay. Well, the point I'm making here is what the quantum idealism is saying is, no, you can understand those things, but if you can't understand them, then you cannot really know anything about the supernatural, right? Through human reason.
Yeah, but if we can't understand it, then we can potentially know something about the supernatural.
Yes. And so, but if you can't, though, then the only way you can actually know about it is through divine revelation, which creates a problem.
So let's grant that what you're saying is true, and there is some access to the supernatural realm, and we can know something about it. How can we look at your model and say, "Don't wash your hands" was objectively wrong?
Well, that one, I think that's a bit too specific to get.
Every single interpretation is going to be specific based off of some particular phrase.
Well, actually, let me give an example that is more. This is actually a very interesting one because it actually ties into. Remember, I said that religion is actually based on this stuff.
Yeah.
You want to give me an example of religion being based on this stuff? Because it actually applies to actually a concrete set of moral statements that are found in religion, particularly relating to like sexuality and gender relations. That is actually it's a political hot button topic, right? Because it's like, it ties into social issues today.
I don't really care about the specific example. What I want to know is just any general way, because
generally speaking, what I'm giving here is like a methodology for like generally a way in which you could start to answer this question. Okay. The way in which you could answer this question is beforehand. Divine revelation was because the supernatural is outside of our comprehension. It's magic in the fairy dust sense. Because it is magic and fairy dust, you cannot grasp it.
Yeah, there's no evaluation.
You cannot grasp it. The only way you can know about it is through divine revelation. But because you can't reason about it, because your mind is out, it's below your thinking, it is therefore something that you cannot question. You have to follow it blindly with unquestioned. That the magicness of like the kind of the religious way of thinking leads very directly to the divine revelational epistemology.
Yeah. Everybody has their own divine revelation and can do whatever they want with it. Sure.
Yes, I know. And that's a problem because there's no check or balance on it.
I see the same problem with yours. I don't see how, even if we say that there's some connection between physics and the supernatural, how there is any way to falsify the Bethlehem Baptist interpretation of quantum consciousness and your interpretation of quantum consciousness. I don't see any way to distinguish between those two.
Well, okay, I don't know specifically what their interpretation would be necessarily. But what I'm getting at is that this is
they would agree with all of the physics.
Okay, maybe this is not an issue of like getting. Before we get to that question, we got to it. Maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself. You might be right that I'm jumping ahead of myself here. There is like a layer beneath this. Okay, before we get to the issue of did they get it wrong versus did I get it wrong? There's a different layer beneath this it kind of sets the groundwork up to whether you could actually answer that question. And maybe that's the step we need to be taking instead of can we falsify it directly, okay? And that is if the supernatural is accessible to reason, human reason, rather than being something that we just need divine revelation to rely upon, then we have a way of at least critiquing it.
Sure.
We can respond to and say, no, wait just a fat second here. That's not how it works. Let me show you how it works.
Sure.
And now maybe my interpretation is wrong too, and so on. But the point is then because this toolbox is out, okay, everyone, you here and like whoever else around here can take the toolbox and say, wait just a minute, you did your calculation wrong. And I'm going to show you this is how it actually works. And because we know how the supernatural actually works, I can show you how you arranged your model the wrong way and therefore got to your wrong conclusion, and therefore, this thing over here in the religion is not quite set up right.
Yes, we like falsifiability. Falsifiability is good.
That's the thing. It doesn't maybe give you a specific example of falsification that you'd want, which, I mean, I would want that too, but maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself there. But it does give you a means by which you can start to do that. You can say, no, wait just a fast second here. There is a God, and your arguments are right. They do give you evidences for God, but we know about that God now because we can actually grok that God with science, and we can grok the supernatural with science in such a way, or what is, erroneously called the supernatural with science, in such a way that we can say, wait just a fast second here. That's not how it works. It works this way instead, and we can show you this from X, Y, and Z principles that it works this way, and therefore you don't get to go and get gaze up against the wall and shoot them like that one crazy assembly person in Texas was saying or something.
Well, you seem to have made a jump from claiming that you have a way to evaluate supernatural to a specific example, like I've been
maybe I don't. That's why I said maybe I went ahead of myself too fast. But I'm saying is this gives you a means anyway of being able to open up the possibility of putting a pushback on that person using something other than the Bible as a means of critique.
Well, the two problems I see is one is first you'd have to demonstrate that you can actually do that with falsification. You have to falsify something specifically that is relatable or relevant to the culture in order for it to be useful or practical. Secondly is none of the Bethlehem Baptist people are going to care. They don't care.
None of them are going to care, but the point is you won't get them. Obviously, what is it? Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Who will like it? Who will agree with me on this is the atheists who already like the scientific method.
Like it, but you're also going to get a subset of people who are in the random Joe camp.
Maybe, but I don't think so. Like, I think I can come up with arguments that will.
Let me put it like this. Okay. In order to counter religion, I mean, I like religion. I want religion around, but at the same time, there are versions of it, and we don't want Westboro Baptist. Or Doug Wilson, for example, he has this idea that is like
universalism.
He abuse the word Christian nationalism, but in his case, it's not an abuse. But he wants Christian nationalism, and he wants like stuff that is. Like I do not want him having political power, shall we say, right?
Sure.
Okay, so we don't want Doug Wilson having political power, and so the point I'm getting at is this way you can get you can convince enough people to like demonstrate like okay.
Well, so
back up.
Pause for a second. Let's say I have an option between using your argument or using Sam Harris's argument. Which one is going to convince more people?
Long run, mine will. And the reason it's going to do this...
I 100% disagree. I don't think your argument is going to have any relevance whatsoever to the majority of people. Sam Harris, like I mentioned earlier, William Lane Craig and Sam Harris, their approaches are more relatable to more people and are going to win the argument.
Yeah, that may be true in some sense, but what I'm getting at is in the long run... Remember what I said about atheist experiments?
Sure.
They last about 100 years, right?
Sure.
Okay. Well, if they last about 100 years, you're going to end up with religion again, right?
Sure.
You can't get rid of the religion because it literally is a part of human nature, right? This is built into evolutionary psychology that we have religions, right? And it will keep happening, okay?
Yeah, it's just the bias.
And non-religious populations die out after about 100 years. You cannot... in the long run, use atheism as a way, so in 100 years, you could have a situation where some guy in Texas is like, let's kill the gays or let's ban contraceptive. Actually, there is actually one instance where I can give you a definitive statement from my occult understanding of certain principles that can actually lead to practical results. So like say arguing against like some Catholics want to have a birth control ban. I don't mean like abortifacient birth control. I mean, they want like all birth control gone, right?
Well, so the question is if we have two options, pursue the Sam Harris approach that leads to this 100-year atheist thingy, or pursue your approach, which is most likely to mitigate the Christian nationalist approach? Sam Harris is going to mitigate.
In the short term, Sam Harris is going to mitigate.
No, yours isn't going to mitigate at all. That's what I'm saying is that if we attempt to apply your methodology.
Well, because what I'm arguing essentially is
I understand what you're arguing. If we attempt to apply your methodology, the vast majority of religious people who don't care about the scientific method are just going to ignore it and continue doing their own thing.
I got a question then. Okay, this raised the question of which religion.
Which religion of what?
Okay, so you said the vast majority of religious people will not care.
All of them. Of all religions. The vast majority of all religions are just regular people.
What if we create a new religion, though?
Again, the religion itself is irrelevant. What matters is what is the generic average human being? What kind of things are they attracted towards? And the
Okay, but
things
what I'm
they're
saying,
attracted
so
towards
what I'm
is
trying to say here
intuitive,
is that
cognitive
the issue is
biases.
not to get rid of the religion; it's to transmute the religion.
Yeah, and what I'm saying
Offers
is
the
that your won't work because you aren't appealing to the people who are religious. You're
That's the
appealing to the
problem.
scientists who don't care about religion. And so if you're trying to convince the religious people to modify religion by using the thing that the scientists and atheists like, you're barking up the wrong tree.
Wrong
If you
tree.
want to
Okay.
create a new religion or try to modify religion, you're going to have to do the Jordan Peterson approach of going hard into intuitions and fallacies and biases in order to
I
try and
see. It's a problem. It's a problem because it's like you can't really create a religion on science in a certain sense.
yes, because the people who are attracted to
You attract it
science
to religion. It's
are
all about psychology. It's not about reason. It's about psychology.
that's right.
Unless you have what I was hoping for. Okay, what I was hoping for here was the idea was you could have the atheists who are not going to be religious. They're not the religious type, but they could, by constantly using this, instead of saying therefore atheism, you say therefore atheism, or this quantum idealism, which actually turns out to be Hermeticism when you look at it closely enough. Like it's 100% isomorphic to Hermeticism, which is crazy. When you look at that parallel, okay, what you discover is religion is what you could then have though is the atheists forcing the religious people to be honest in a sense. Yes, we grant you a God. Yes, we grant you your arguments work, but they point to this specific hermetic God, and this has entailments for your theology. You can't just then say, therefore, we get to run well with theology. This has entailments for theology, and it puts it in a box in a sense. It says we can't.
That's
You get
only
to have what
if
you
they
want.
accept the scientific method and accept the conclusions of
Well,
that interpretation.
that's why you keep pushing back on them.
They don't
You're
care
there.
about that. That isn't convincing to them. They don't care about the scientific method. What's
That's why you make
convincing
them
to
care.
them,
That's why you make them
you
care, and you do a good
you
job at that.
can't make them care. You to make them care, you Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is making them care successfully. Again, you're using the scientific method, which is not compelling to the people you're trying to compel. And it is compelling to the people who aren't theists and aren't going to believe in theism. And so your entire approach is aimed at the wrong people.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It is a bit of a problem. I was trying to brainstorm this, and I was like, yeah, because they're talking past each other. Like atheists and Christians have begun to talk past each other in some sense, haven't they? Like they don't.
Well, yes and no. So again, the whole point of the four horsemen, Hitchens, Harris, Dawkins, Dennett, was they were using intuitively compelling arguments to convince theists or general public that the theist arguments don't work, and they were doing it extremely successfully, and that's why they were so popular. The hardcore science guys were never as popular as Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins because they didn't express their ideas of complicated physics in a way that was intuitively understanding to the target audience.
Oh, that's a
And
good
so
point. Even the atheist movement was like, I mean, like the popular part of it was
still
not
is
as
Aaron Ra. Aaron Ra is not a hardcore science guy. He just says words that make sense to atheists. Same Dillahunty is closer to science and philosophy, but still not there. So the people, the figureheads of both all communities, all religions and non-religions, most people operate on intuition and fallacies and biases and cognitive delusions, and those ideas get cemented in their head significantly faster and with less effort than do very well thought out methodologies.
simply
And
because people don't tend to do that as
well,
often.
it because of how our brains work, those ideas get accepted by our brains very quickly, and to figure out that they're wrong takes a lot of work, which most people don't do. And even in the atheist community, to do that work takes longer to change those ideas than it does to just accept initially the silly arguments that Aaron Ra makes sometimes. So the silly arguments Aaron Ra makes are very intuitive. They make sense to an atheist, so they accept them very quickly. And in order to realize they're wrong, you have to do a lot of work. And so these arguments that are intuitive can get stuck in people's mind very quickly, very easily, and make change. And then the time it takes to reverse that change is
Takes forever.
significantly longer. Just like politics, you can do a single build change, which seems really great, and everybody thinks it's really cool, but it
Then you're
causes
stuck with it
tons
for
of
50
damage.
years.
Yeah, and then you're stuck with the Supreme Court that we have now for X number of years, and reversing it takes a lot of problems, a lot of challenges. So if your goal is to make changes among the religious community to make them more honest, then the best way is to use their intuitions and biases in the same Jordan Peterson way, and just have that an extension of
That's
that.
interesting. How do you change their intuitions and biases to be
You don't
more
change their
scientific?
intuitions. You use their
Use your
intuitions,
intuitions.
and then have an entailment of the ideology be science. So you just use the same Jordan Peterson intuitions, and then
That's a
just
good
have
point.
your model be the like core of using those intuitions. Like all these intuitional arguments and fallacies and biases that get stuck in people's heads. Oh, and by the way, here's the core foundation for anybody who's interested in delving deeper, and it has all the logic stuff in it.
Right. So you want to get them to the idea of there's God, but God has to be explained scientifically, but as a matter of an intuitional, like we think this because it makes intuitive sense to us, not because we dug deep into this whole conscious realist quantum idealist.
Well, maybe there's multiple ways to do it. You just have to use their intuitions, and there can be many different approaches to use their intuitions that may have nothing to do with logic or methodology. And if you can get them to adopt your ideology because of intuition, and then you can teach them the more intricacies of your ideology, then they can become more scientifically minded. But to get them, you have to use the intuitions. Like this has been known about religions for years.
That's fair. Yeah, you know what this actually reminds me of? And this is on both sides. It's not just like this is the atheist.
All groups do
all
this.
groups, period. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made a video, not a video, an argument before videos. He made an essay about how stupidity is actually more dangerous than evil.
Sure.
And he was saying you can't argue. I mean, there was a problem of like stupid people in large numbers, and you can't argue with them.
Yep.
Like it's like literally like you can't use reason to fix the problem, and it's very frustrating. It's like because they don't operate on a reason-based motivation. It's all knee-jerk
intuitions. Yep.
Instincts and intuitions. So were you a bit surprised about the back on jumping subjects briefly? Were you a bit surprised about the realization, the argument you were given in your debate with Jones was actually a Hermetic occultism?
Oh, it doesn't make a difference to me. Like I don't care about origins of arguments.
No, but do you think it's funny though?
I'm too autistic to think it's funny.
Okay. He's been using that for some time now, and it's like I'm wondering what's going to happen when it's discovered by like.
Well, I would say my intuitive response is that the same thing that applies to every single thing that originates outside of Christianity that they found out they were using. Like the Golden Rule comes from Hinduism, it predates Christianity, right. but you know, God created the universe. He predated Hinduism, and so he was just using his mind to influence the Hindus. Like this exactly.
Yes, I know, but it's in their minds when something is occult. Is sometimes it has like a concept that is like it's radioactive in some sense.
They're just going to say the same thing, that it originates from God, and the occultists are stealing it from God. They're stealing it from the original Christianity of Jesus-ness.
They could, but there is no. Of course, the issue there is there's nothing in Christianity per se that looks directly like it. Nothing that looks like this too much. Like their whole concept of God was there's a material world down here, and then God's up there as like this kind of.
Yeah, they apply it to literally anything, whether or not it has a basis in Christianity.
Yeah, you got a point. You have a point there.
But yeah, we're going for about
what's going to happen when it's realized that this is like that's what this actually is the whole time.
Well, you should ask Inspiring Philosophy what he thinks about it. He would probably be like a test run, essentially, of what you think what's going to happen. And I would bet my money on him saying one, no, it's not. Or what is that thing? The Gandhi has.
Well, I know for a fact that it is because he got it from me.
No. Forget that. So like. The Gandhi has the 5 stages of, I think it was grief or something. First is denial. Second is like grief, acceptance. I forget the 5 stages. That's what's going to happen. The 5 stages.
That is, but the thing with it is he can't just say, no, it's not. Between him and me, he can't say, no, it's not. Because he got it from me. And I know when I was deriving it in the first place, I was deriving it specifically to try and see if I could derive the Hermetic principle of correspondence from physics.
That's only if you assume his brain is working logically, not emotionally. Doesn't work that way.
Well,
His brain works
individual
emotionally.
basis. The average person, yes, but Michael Jones, I mean, he,
You should do this. You should call him and ask and record it, and I will bet money. The first thing he says is, no, it's not. And he's going to think of a reason why he thinks it's not, even if he knows that you are the origin of the idea and probably have better information. I'll bet money. But we have been going for about 2 hours. I need to go to bed because I wake up at 5 a.m. for work.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Did you want to give any shout outs to your channel or something?
Yeah. You get shouts out there. Check that out. It's Johan Raatz. It's on my, just the same as my name on my channel. So, and also check out the Palmer's book. That's what this was. I mean, they go on. I was deriving pieces of Hermeticism from quantum idealism, but they went full length on this, and they derived the entire system systematically in the book. So it's called the Quantum Hermetica. It's on Amazon. So
cool. Thanks again for coming on. Appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Yeah, sure.
Talk to you later.